All right, we're back, and it's COMP 2007. It's week 1, lesson 1, part 3. And we just finished talking about it. We did a little bit of a GitHub demo. Again, we created a repository remotely. We synced up to it with both Visual Studio and with command line. We did both those two things, right? And now I want to talk about a little bit of the technology of ASP.NET. We'll do a bit of PowerPoint stuff finally, and then we'll try and do some stuff physically in Visual Studio with ASP.NET web forms. So again, I want to talk about how do we make our websites. I want to talk a little bit about history, but not too much. I'm not a big history guy. I don't sit there and go, here's the history of the internet, right? But I will talk about a couple things on the internet that we've kind of seen before, but never really talked about. Like, for example, request response. That's really, really important from a ASP.NET perspective to understand requests and response that go on, messaging that goes on the internet. So here's your typical, I'm going to see if I can make this a little larger for you guys. And bear with me while I switch modes. Switch modes. So again, you have your, a computer, your tablet, your smartphone, what have you. You connect to the internet. We make it a cloud again because there's many different servers and stuff on the internet. Then you get your web server. This is a typical scenario for your standard web application, right? And just from a naming perspective, when we name stuff, the protocol is HTTP. We're moving more towards HTTPS. I know that Google is scoring you lower nowadays if you don't use a secure website. If you're not an HTTPS website, you score lower from an organic scoring perspective on the SEO, search engine optimization, right, than you would normally score if you had a secure site, like an SSL certificate. So more and more companies are getting SSL certificates, even if they're not selling stuff. It's better from a security perspective, right? So that's the protocol. HTTP, HTTPS, typically the two we're going to use. Then there's a domain name, whatever it is, example.com. And then the path, usually some kind of folder or the file name. If you leave the file name out, just like we normally do, it kind of puts it in for you, whether it's index.html or default.html. It looks for standard files. The server, all servers look for standard files to kind of look at to launch your application, right? And depending on how you set up IIS, right, Internet Information Services, right, locally, or if you're on Azure remotely, we'll talk about Azure a little bit today. It depends on which file to look at, like default.aspx. If you're using a ASP.NET application, that'll be the one that'll fire as a default, depending on if there's certain files and folders in your path. All right, so again, we talked about this. A URL, this uniform resource locator, again, it's going back to the beginnings with this stuff. You put it in the browser, you hit enter, it sends a message, right? That's a request to the server. That's what it does, right? And the request that goes to the server, it comes back with a response. This is really key. It's important, even though we've seen it before a million times. This request response, the nature of the way web works, is where ASP.NET works a little slightly different. Because right now, if you think about the state of an HTML page, it's stateless, right? If you go back to that. By the way, anything that I share with you from a PowerPoint perspective, anything that we talk about in class, it's all fair game for your exams, right? So anything like this, request response, I'm definitely going to put something like that on your test, right? So you have to understand what that means when I ask those questions. So really, when I set up an HTTP request, that's the protocol request that I send out to the server. The server looks at it, it processes the request, and then sends a response based on the route, right? However, I'm going to route the response back, and then it creates the page, the view that you're going to see on your page. It creates that view, and then your web page changes based on how we design our web page, our index.html or our default.htm, whatever it's called, Aspx. That file is a manifest for how our page is going to look, right? And what happens is at the server level, it processes that page and spits it out. This is easy stuff. We've done this before. If you've done any kind of HTML, anything, you've done this, right? But let's talk about what Asp.NET does, right? So here's our web browser again. We send a request. Before we get a response back, it goes through this Internet Information Server, right? Now again, whether it's local or whether it's on the web, like on Azure, as an again, it's going to go through something called an application server, right? Now, this may be the exact same hardware. It could be, because you're running multiple servers at the same time, right? You have your Internet Information Server, your web server, and then you have your ASP.NET application server. It's all one package. Most times now, because when you run an ASP.NET application, you want to have some kind of data linked to it, because remember, we're making dynamic websites. Think about ASP.NET as Microsoft's answer to a PHP or a Node or something like on the back end. We want to be able to connect to a data store of some kind, and Microsoft's data store is SQL, right? Microsoft SQL, right? So that's what's on the database side. So it hits the database, gets the information from the database, then comes back into the application server, processes that information, and creates the view through your web server, and that's the final response that it sends to your browser, right? So that whole thing that we just talked about, again, from an exam perspective, it's called a round trip, all right? The request response, this whole request response thing is the round trip that it does from your web browser, from the user, through the web server, into the application server, across the database server and back, okay? It's important to know this because it's different than how other solution stacks work. For example, if you're using AMP and AMP stack, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, slightly different than how this works. We do have an application server as well. The application server is running PHP in a PHP stack, right? But the difference is there's a different level of intelligence in terms of how we work with ASP.NET than the way PHP works. And the same thing goes with, instead of having a PHP site nowadays, which again I think is kind of becoming less and less in the mode, right? When you create a Node server, right? Node replaces the server, the platform. So that's your web server, that's your Node or Express server or whatever. And then what you use is, instead of an application server, you create your own Node server that handles routing and responses to connect to the database. And typically the database is going to be a NoSQL database, a non-relational database, and but the same request response still takes place there as well, right? And by the way, this map that you're seeing here, and I apologize for the lighting, but the map you see here is going to be slightly different with MVC frameworks, right, as opposed to this flat ASP.NET Web Forms framework. So it looks like this for ASP.NET Web Forms, different from ASP.NET MVC. It's slightly different because you have all your concerns, your model, your view, and your controller are separated out, right? And so it allows you to build more scalable applications that way for enterprise. Okay, so we've kind of talked about this round trip. Please keep in mind what it's called. So again, starts when the client requests a page and it ends when the page is returned to the browser. This round trip is what we're talking about here. All right. It's funny how Microsoft has created this stuff. Really, there's two main services out there. There's also some minor ones. Web Forms is the oldest, 70%, again, like I said, of companies who use ASP.NET and IIS use Web Forms, right? And 30% right now, that's the kind of the ratio. They use MVC, this Model View Controller Framework, right? So these are the two most popular ones. And again, there's others that they also use as well. So here's the .NET framework. And if you notice, you've got your different kind of applications. You've got Visual Basic, Visual C#. We've done, we do Visual C# with RAD, Rapid Application Development, and that's COMP2004, if I'm not wrong, right? I'm guessing the number, right? I'm thinking that's what it is. You guys did that with Angie, right? Or for the most part. Some people may have done it with me. You've got Visual C++ and Visual F#. Well, they use all these different languages, right? They use this common language runtime, right? The common language runtime it shares a bunch of different things among all these different types of languages, right? And they also use this so-called .NET Framework class library, So all the class libraries and the data structures and everything else, every language, C#, Visual Basic, and so on, they use the same data types across platform. This is good. So what Microsoft has created is a standardized platform that when you use one technology, using the same data types and everything else as another technology. So if you were trying to run this with VB, same data types, Booleans, all that kind of stuff that you would normally see, floats, doubles, decimals, all that same stuff is what you're going to see here. So it is with ASP.NET, right? And we'll get to that. Now here's some example operating systems that we pump things out for. We do for Windows 7, we create applications for Windows 8, other operating systems, and of course for the web. But this common language runtime is the real key, the CLR so-called. So if you're going to get tested and I ask you what CLR stands for, it's Common Language Runtime, right? And it's this common platform that Microsoft uses for things like data exchange and data types and so on. So what happens is on the front end, we use kind of this high-level language, C#, VB, whatever. On the back end, when it gets compiled, it kind of sends it into this, it creates this Microsoft intermediate language that's compiled and turned into assembly by the CLR, Common Language Runtime. So it doesn't matter where I'm programming in C#, in F#, and C++, or whatever. At the end, it gets converted through this Common Language Runtime into assembly and looks exactly the same to the machine. So it really depends on what you feel comfortable using and what's the best application framework for the job you're doing. All right, a little bit about client-server, and I talked about how browsers are really stateless, and so it becomes challenging for us to have this persistence, right? We have to create something. We use binding in order for us to create kind of a data connection with our server. We use data binding in order for us to do this. It's actually the one thing about data binding when we do things in Visual Studio with ASP.NET is it's one-way binding, right? With AngularJS, it's two-way binding. This is the new technology that we talk about today. And two-way binding means when you start using two-way binding, I get an immediate response when I start typing stuff out in the server. I get immediate connection with the server with Angular, as opposed to I have to submit to the server and then I get a response, one-way binding. So again, there's a couple of different things when we talk about state. There's the view state, which is really your default. This is the stuff that actually gets sent out to the browser when it hits the after it does this round trip. Session state we talk about when it comes to authentication, right? So if the session state is active, it allows us to go and access different pieces of our application. And then there's different other states here. We'll talk about more of these states as we move forward in the course. But you need to understand state protocol, and also remember that typically a static HTML5 page or HTML page is stateless, right? Which means it doesn't know, right? It has nothing. It doesn't. If I was to access it the first time, it doesn't mean that I have a persistent connection with the server. I don't have that necessarily. Let's do this now. This is our time to do, right? So I want to create our first website. We did kind of this website. I'm just going to go back into this piece here with Visual Studio, but man, I kind of put together all this stuff here, right? It has all these files. I don't want all these files. I just want to create a simple web form, right? Something that's understandable to us. I think that's important. So let us kill all this stuff. We'll start off a new project. I'm going to go File, Close Solution, right, at this stage. And I'll kill this one as well. I'm going to go File, New Project, right? And this time I'm going to go ASP.NET Web Application, and we're going to call this COMP2007 Lesson 1, Part 3. Now, I'm not connected to GitHub. And by the way, see where I have web forms over here? I'm going to go to empty. Empty basically creates a nice little place, a container that we can put everything in. Okay, and this is what you'd be used to if you've done COMP2007 with me, something empty like this. I'm going to kill this window as well. One thing we do need is I want to create a new GitHub repository, so I'm going to go into GitHub, for our test, I'm going to go plus, hit this plus button in GitHub and create a new repository in here, and it's going to be COMP2007. And for those people who've never used GitHub before, if I pick the same name, it's going to give me a problem. It's going to say you can't do that. So I'm going to change this to part 3, right? Once I've got that, I press create repository, right? I've got my URI. I'm going to copy this thing. And when I go back here, I'm going to go into Team Explorer right away and kind of go into Home, go into Changes, and then maybe I'll put something like Initial Commit here because I've just got my base project. Visual Studio base web project, right? And in there, I'm going to go Home. I'm going to go to Unsync Commits. I'm going to drop in my URL and publish. And when I do that, and if I go back into GitHub, I'm connected now with GitHub. There I am. Okay, we don't need this right now. You can always go into my GitHub and find out what we're doing today, right? Let's go back to Solution Explorer. So I've got nothing in here. This actually looks very similar to what we did in COMP2007 in other courses, an empty project, right? Now I want to add a web form. Now there's different ways to do this. Let's do this for the first time. So I'm going to right click, and for our little demo, I'm going to add, right? And if you notice, there's a bunch of different things I can add. If I go HTML page, that's a static page. I don't want to do that now anymore, right? I want to do this web form, and we're going to be working exclusively with web forms pretty much in this course. So if I click web form, it does a couple things for me. Let's try this out. Instead of web form, I'm going to call this default, right? And press OK. And what it does, what Microsoft does, is Visual Studio, it creates this default Aspx, and it gives me what very much looks like a standard form, right? Or a standard HTML page. Let me make it a bit bigger for you guys to see. It also includes a couple things here. Now, you might see a different view. Because on the bottom, one thing that it includes with Asp.NET is they have different views. They have the pure design view. Let's take a look at that. Right, here's design view right now, right? Here's my split view, right, which I can actually look at the top and the bottom. There's code view for the HTML page, and here there is some, we can actually do drag and drop with Visual Studio, just like we used to do our other web forms, right? Or other Windows forms. If I look at my toolbox, I can actually have a toolbox on the side, right? I'm going to pin it to the side. It looks very similar to what we did with rapid application development. I have all these tools on the left-hand side that I can kind of drag and drop into my interface. I can also drag and drop these tools right into my, my HTML page too, right? All right, so if I scroll down, and if I look at there's a data page, a login page, a validation page, a navigation, all these different things, and some basic HTML tags as well, right? Like an input button, text area, table, all these things are here if I wanted to use them. For example, I mean, if you look through here as an example, there is no H1 tag though. Like you need still to understand HTML a little bit, right? So if I wanted to put an H1 tag inside my div, I mean, I literally could do something like this. I can say, just like before, H1. I'm going to use Zen coding now. I'm going to make this open bracket, left bracket, and inside there I'm going to say, kind of put in a hello world again. Let's do that hello world example, and then a close curly brace, and then a tab. And what this does is it does the shorthand for my hello world. Now it says here, it says design view is out of sync with source view. Click here to synchronize the views. So if I do that, now I have what a preview of what my web page is going to look like down here. All right? Again, you may choose to work like this, source only. And you may choose to just try it out in Chrome by using IS like we used to do. That's fine too. If I run it in Chrome right now, I'm going to see the same thing, right? Here's my hello world, right? There's nothing different here, guys. Nothing that we haven't done before. Right? We're just going slow because I want to talk about some of this stuff with you. All right. Let me stop debugging. So there's a couple things also I want to try and do. One thing is, this is no good for us. Hey, we want to do HTML5. Remember what we did before? We want to get rid of this. I don't need this HTML, XML, HTTP, www, w3 org. What does this do anyway? Does anyone know what this little line does? No? It tells me that I'm compliant with W3 standards for my web design. It helps me do some troubleshooting. I don't need to do that right now. I'm just going to put in lang, right, is equal to English, right? Because that's the one thing that makes us compatible with HTML5, right? So you can still use HTML5, that whole standard with ASP.NET. Doesn't mean that because you're using ASP Microsoft stuff that you can't do HTML5. We want to use HTML5. All right, and in my head, there's something different that we've never seen before. This attribute called runAt. You're going to see that a lot in ASPX, ASP.NET. RunAt means I have to use this attribute to run at the server. Where is this page running? It's running in the server. Another couple things up here. In the top line, we have this other information up here. Take a look, right? I'm gonna kind of hide these things again, just so we can see this whole line. If you see what it says my page, my language is C#, right? My auto event wire up is true. My code behind file is default.aspx.cs. We'll talk about what that is. And what it does is it inherits from COMP2007 default, and so on. And it's separated by these % less than and % greater than. Well, guess what those look like? If you've done PHP, it's less than question mark PHP question, but what's going to call it the other side, PHP. It's the same thing. All I'm doing is this is the way that ASP.NET does it. It basically injects, we're using injection here to inject content or communicate with the server some way, right? That's what this thing does. So this is actually, whenever we see less than %, right? Anything like that, the @ sign, the hash, there's a bunch of other things you might see here. This is a way of us communicating with the ASP.NET application server whenever you see this syntax. All right, let's do the next one. So I want to change my title. I want to make it so it's going to say hello world, my title as well. Why not? And in my head, I also want to put in some meta tags, right? Now, if you notice, when I run this thing, if I run it again, on the bottom, I'll let this run. It still runs. On the bottom here, inside this little window, I might get an error list. I get a couple of warnings, and then there's a message, a suggestion that says, for SEO, I don't know if you guys get the same message, SEO, use HTML5 microdata to add semantic meaning to the website. You guys get that? No? I do because I've turned some stuff on. What this means, and you might get that for yourself as well, if I double click this, it says, do you want a browser tutorial or a browser tutorial? It'll take me to, for me to understand what this microdata is. Well, what this actually is, it's just a warning or a suggestion. Let's pull this down a little bit. That says, I need some meta tags at the top of my, in my head, right? So the first meta tag that I always suggest is, I'm going to type meta, is my character set meta tag, which I always use, and I want to make it so that it's UTF-8. It's very, very important. Once I say it's UTF-8 compatible, I'm good to go, right? The next meta tag I want to put in there, right, is a meta tag that tells me my name, right, is equal to viewport, my viewport tag, right, and content is equal to, and this is where it's funny. Sometimes it'll give it to you, and sometimes you have to remember what it is. Yeah, let's see if you guys remember what it is. Is width is equal to device width, comma, initial dash scale is equal to 1. So that kind of handles compatibility across mobile browsers as well, right? So I was looking for some of that from an SEO perspective. If I run this now, it's not going to make any difference. If I refresh the page, right, it's still going to run, right? There's no difference in my hello world. I got this 1 in here. That's weird. I must have made a typo somewhere. Yeah, I did. That's why it was giving me that error, right? But that's typically what we want. We still always want to have these two meta tags inside of our file. Okay. There's no difference there. Now this is all fine and good. Let me go back into our. We'll stop debugging for a second, and we'll go back into our design time. Here's my design time. If I actually make some space, if I click in here Who's ever used any kind of, I know you guys have used ASP.NET. Some people have used ASP.NET MVC. But have you ever used anything else? Anyone use Microsoft Blend, right? Or Expression Web? Those are the older technology. If you guys use Expression, who said yeah? If you use Expression Web, it's very similar to this. If you actually see this, the structure, this drag and drop stuff, it's very, very similar when we use Expression Web, right? So if you know Expression Web, you know we can drag and drop right now if I want to, right? So let's say, as an example, I make some spaces. What am I doing here actually? I'm actually making spaces. There's an H1 tag. There's a couple P tags. If I go back into my source, what have I done? I've actually added in a couple of P tags. That's all I'm doing by physically hitting enter on the design side. So there's design view, and then there's source view, right? So there's a couple ways I can do this. Inside my this area here, I could put in, I'm in my div tag, I'm inside my form, I'm still inside a form, which is very important. Again, everything we do, we'll be doing pretty much within a form, right? Because we're doing web forms, right? So inside this form, we can put additional information in here, right? Okay, like for example, if I want a picture of a user, I can use my Zen coding in here, hand bomb it, and I can put something like a lorem, or a picture that's, let's say, I don't know, a person's picture that's 200 by 150, or let's say, sorry, 150 by 200, more like, right? I'm using Zen coding there to do that. All I've done was, I'll go back for those people who don't remember. It's the shorthand that you get with Visual Studio Web Essentials. Remember? So I go pix-150 by 200, and then I press tab, and then it kind of includes my lorem pixel, you know, kind of placeholder image, right? So if I run this now, I should get an image, right? 150 by 200. So some kind of image, and let's say that's an image of me, right? And you know, a person. And in here, I want to put some information about their name, their phone number, and all that kind of stuff, right? Okay, cool. If I want to do it underneath, it's no problem. I can use these paragraph tags, right? Inside my paragraph tag, I can do it. I definitely need to use CSS here, because without CSS, it's going to look pretty bad, right? But let's say, for example, I'm not necessarily want to do it next to it. If I want to do it next to it, how do I do it? How do I put my name and my everything else next to it? Sorry? Float. I like that. I like how you can do that. Yes, that's for sure. So I would definitely do a couple things. Should I put my picture and these other paragraph tags inside the same div tag as my hello world? Probably not, right? So let's add a couple more div tags. Now, there's a couple ways to do that here, right? Oh, look, I got a pretty girl now. That wasn't my intention, I swear, right? That's random. It was a random picture, guys. Random, right? What? Only Robin? Come on, right? So again, I can drag and drop stuff in here. Like for example, I want, you know, and by the way, I don't want to use a table. I don't want to use tables. I want to use CSS for what I want to do, right? Table is very old school. Although they may tell you how to use a table in the book or whatever. We don't want to try and do that. There is that option available here. But let's say, for example, I want some information. There's different ways I can do that. Because I'm in a form, I could use it as a label. So I could say, drag and drop a label in here, right? And if you notice, my label floats right next to the picture, right? Because that's the way the picture. If I go back to the source, right? Look what it does. It's not a regular label. It's an ASP label. If you notice this ASP code at the front end, this is our tag, a new tag that we're using ASP.NET, and our ID is label 1. And where is it running? On the server. I need to do this run at command, right? So it's not just a regular label, if you will. It's something else, and it's inside the same div tag, right? But it's outside of any paragraph tag. So if I was to take these two things, the picture and the label, and put them inside my first paragraph tag. Let's just get rid of the second paragraph tag for a second. Just for a second, right? I'm inside the same paragraph tag now, right? I've got my label. I can name this label. My label ID is something that I want to access. So maybe I want to make this my name. So I'll call this label first name. That's the value that's going to be inside the label itself, inside the node of the text node of the label, right? So let's say my ID, I want to call this name label or first name label, right? I always use these big ass, identifiers, right? First name label. Okay, here's my first name label. And if I go back to the design mode, right, what do I see? Same picture, by the way. So it didn't switch. Right? She didn't go away, the Chinese girl or the Asian girl. I do have my first name in here. I need some kind of another label or some other kind of information that I'm going to put next to it. Right? Now again, I'm not doing anything with CSS yet. All right? So right next to this, to the picture, I've got this and my first name, and I want to definitely put some kind of information in the first name. It's going to populate in there, and I want to put my last name. All right, so let's try that. So I'm going to go back to source. Now, there's a couple ways I could do that. I could drag and drop. So I could put in there, well, I want a text box. Here's my text box. This is the place where it's going to populate, right? Even though the text box looks like an entry form right now, this text box is where I want stuff to populate, let's just say, right? Okay, cool. And then I'm going to press enter. If I press enter, it creates a new paragraph tag. Well, maybe I don't want that, right? I can always put Control Z. If I want another label, I can copy these two things. I can copy just like we normally would. So I'm going to kind of, shift click to copy. I could do that, right? There I am. Copy. And then paste, right? And instead of first name, I can physically change it here in design view, right? I can change to last name. Now, why is it populating like that? Because I have no CSS to tell my text where to go, right? My labels, how to appear. Okay, and here's my text box. What does it look like on the source view? On the source view, I've got a label. Here's my first label, my first name label, right? And I've got my text box. Well, I want to name this text box, so I'm going to call it first name text box. First name text box, right? And then I've got my last name, right? Oh wait, what happened? Where's my label, man? Right? She be gone, my label, right? But I can actually include another label. I can copy this. Let's see what happens if I copy it here in code. Will it conflict? So I call this first name label here in code. What happens when I actually do this? Right? Copy and paste. Well, guess what? It defaults back to label 1, which is a good thing. I'm just going to space this in so it's more justified here. I'm going to put this a little bit down so you can see it a little bit nicer. I want to get rid of this for a second, right? But this is in the code side. You notice this first name label, first name text box, and then I got a label 1 and a text box 2. So let's do last name label. Right, and here we're going to do last name text box. Right? Last name label, last name text box. Here's last name as an example. First name, last name. And when I save it, if I go back to design view, I see the same kind of view. If I run this thing in Chrome, let's just put things where it might be different. See, I get a different picture. Right? Okay, cool. So far what I'm doing is, I'm doing what you normally see in a form. Okay, let's code some of the CSS, right? First of all, if I go back into my Solution Explorer and I press stop, because we don't have a folder structure whatsoever, right? So here's my Solution Explorer, I'm going to pin it. Do I have a CSS folder in here? No. The standard way from Microsoft, what Microsoft calls a CSS folder where it keeps all its style, it's called content. So I would recommend we stay with the Microsoft nomenclature for it. So add, and by the way, I'm not going to add a regular folder. Guys, don't do this. Add an ASP.NET folder. That's really important. Now if you notice, there's app code, app global resources, app data, app browsers, a theme, there's different things. Let's just use app code, doesn't matter, it's just a type of folder, right? And I'm going to rename this thing from this, I'm going to go rename, because it is an ASP.NET, I'm going to change this thing to content. Content means This is where I'm going to put my CSS file. Let's create a new CSS file. So I'm going to say, on my content, I'm going to add, I'm going to click on CSS style sheet. Here it is. And when I do that, I'm going to call this my main style sheet, like we did before. This is my main.css. Now, right now, there's no connection. There's no connection from our main CSS to our file, right? There's a couple ways to do this in ASP.NET, right? A couple ways to do this thing, right? One of them is to do what we did before in our other class, right? If I'm going to go back into my source, I can drag and drop this thing, this main.css, underneath my title tag. Here's my title element right here. I can drag and drop this main.css in here like this, right? And what it'll do is it'll create a link into my CSS file like we did before. There's no difference there. That's one way we can do it. But there's also another way. If I go to Manage Styles, right? If I pin this thing, if I look at Manage Styles, there's going to be another opportunity for us to manage our styles with our web form itself, right? Where I can actually look at or kind of create a properties, right, through our Manage Styles panel. Okay, for now, let's stick with what we know, as if we never knew anything to do with ASP.NET. Just drag and drop this thing in here. And when I save it, right, what it does, it creates this, it allows us to create all these properties. It gives us an additional properties list for all my styles. And I can create new styles here as well. So right now, the applied rules is the body rule, because if I look at my main.css, that's all I have in here. It's just the body tag, right? Well, I want to target some stuff. I want to target my label, right? Now, there's a couple ways I can target these things. I have two labels, right? Now, they don't have any classes associated with them. I'm just going to undo this one for a second so you can see. My first label has an ID of first name label, and my next label has an ID of last name label. Is label, capital L, the right way to target this with CSS? Does label even exist from a regular HTML document? The answer is no. When I run this thing right now, if I was to run it in Chrome, right? And if I want to do a view source, this is very, very important. Oh wait, another picture. Garlic. If I view source with Chrome, right? What do I get on the back end? I don't get a label. I get an input type, right? Look at what I got. I got input name is equal to first name text box and a span. It converts it into regular HTML, right? So if I know that, there's only a couple ways I could target both labels. I need to use a class. Because remember, when I target more than one thing, I want to use a class with CSS. If I target a single item, I can use its ID. If I want to do something special with that item, right? That element, right? Because I want to target both labels, I want to use a class that I want to kind of use for both inputs. So let's do that. How do I add a class into this thing? It looks a little different, but it doesn't mean that I can't do what I normally think I can do or what I know that I can do. So I can put in either at the beginning or someplace inside of our element, I can put in class. Now here's where it kind of changes, right? Look what it says, CSS class. Right? If I go CSS class, there's a reason for this, right? And then I'm going to press equals, and let's say my CSS class is going to be my label, whatever. I want to say label, right? I could do that if I want to. Let's say my labels, or name labels. It's called name labels, right? And I want to use the same CSS class, name labels, here it is, in my other label, right? We'll talk about why CSS class in a second. Okay, cool. I've kind of implemented both these CSS classes, right? If I go to main, right, now I want to target my class, right? And if you notice on a CSS perspective, if I was just to work the regular way we normally know how to work, I want to target name labels. How do I target a class in CSS from a refresher perspective? Does anyone remember? Very simple. The period. Hashtag is the ID, right? So now I want to go dot name label. Name labels is what I think I call it. I want to target all name labels. Well, I want them to have some common properties, right? So if I want each of the name labels themselves to be a certain font, I could decide on a font family or a font size. Typically, we want to do font family in the body tag a little bit larger, so it affects everything. Everything in the body has a specific font family, and then you can specify using specificity whether you have a specific element or whatever to have something else. Let's say in a body tag, we'll put in a font family, and we can choose some typical font families right now. I'm going to put in Lucinda Sans. Right? That's kind of, we're going to use a typical font family. Right? We're also going to, I want to kind of implement our standard font size. I want to kind of say our default font size, and right now it's saying our default font size is 12 pixels, right? I can also choose just medium, right? That kind of tells me the same thing, right? Font size medium. From a changes perspective, if I actually run this thing, let's give me some underlines, right? Let's see how it works. You see how the fonts change now for both things, my hello world and my first name, last name. Now it's using Lucinda Sans because I've implemented that in the CSS, right? Nice and easy. Here it is. And now my name labels, I want to give them a little bit of width. Is this the proper place to do it in my width, in my name labels itself? Could I do it? Well, if you forget, one good thing about Microsoft and ASP.NET is, I'm just going to stop debugging here for a second to give us more room. Look at the bottom what it shows here. This is almost like our node path. First it starts with HTML, then it goes body, if you want to trace the node, right? Then it goes form, right? Our form name is form1, right? We can change this, customize that as well to whatever it is. Like for example, maybe this should be called name form. We can change that. Here's our name form, and then we've got a couple of items here, right? Our name labels and whatever, right? Okay, cool. And then we've got our div tag, and inside our div tag we've got a p tag, and inside our p tag we've got this first name text box. All right, so that's what we're targeting. If I actually click on first name text box, right now you can see on the left-hand side, here are my CSS properties for it. And if you notice name labels, because I put name labels inside my CSS file, it appears here in my outliner. I'm looking at that with CSS properties. If you don't see this window, by the way, you can go to View, right, and then CSS Properties. Okay, so you can actually enable this view. So on the left-hand side, you can see I've got Lucinda Sans. That's a font family that's been inherited from my body tag. And when I click on different areas, like the name labels class comes up, I can change it so that, let's say my name labels have a specific color for my class. So for my name labels class, let's say I want my name labels to be some kind of weird green. Okay, there's my green color for my name labels. And I'm going to save. Now if I go back to the main.css file, I'm going to kind of save everything, go back to main.css, and it's added in this color option in my name. So I can do it both ways. I can do it on the here in the CSS file, and I can also use CSS on the other side. All right. So a little bit about CSS. Let's see how this thing looks. It should be green labels now that come up, right? Pretty ugly first name and last name green labels, right? There's the original one, and here's the new one. Right. All right, but I want these two things. I want this thing, and I want these things to kind of run next to each other, right? One thing and the other thing. And I want my first name and last name to kind of appear next to my picture, right? Right now, the way I've got it coded is incorrect, because if I look at the code, right, I've got everything in the same paragraph tag, and I got everything in the same div tag. Will that help me? Can I do something there with CSS to do it anyway? I could, but it's a pain in the ass, is the answer, right? The easier way is for me to either do an aside, if I wanted to make my picture an aside, it would change the way it works, or another div tag. So let's add another div tag in here. I'm doing it by hand, but remember I'm going to stop debugging for a second. Even though I'm on the code side, I can always go on the design side now, and let's see what I'm seeing here. On the design side, I've got these objects, right? I can always add another div tag in here. If I go back to Toolbox, right, if you notice there's buttons and calendars and all this kind of stuff. I can definitely do that. Is there a way I can drag and drop some HTML to create some kind of div tag? And yes, there is, right here, right? So I could physically put another div tag in there. And if I actually do that over here, it creates another container, right? Right underneath this other one, right? If I go right to the top, by the way, there's my hello world. My picture's not showing up, but don't worry about that. Let's do a split view like we did before. Here's my split view. Here's my hello world. And now when I go back into source view, right, I see that I have another div tag, an empty div tag underneath this one, but it's inside of my div tag. And this is where I have issues with dragging and dropping stuff in that view. I want to put this div tag on a different, I don't want to have it nested, so I'm going to kind of cut it out of here and put it over here. Now remember, I can also give my div tags IDs and all that kind of stuff. Right now, my ID for my div tag here, maybe this is, I can give it an ID. Here's my ID. And my ID is equal to, if you notice, it's lowercase ID, not uppercase ID. There's a difference. My lowercase ID is the ID that works in CSS. My uppercase ID is something different. For now, let's make it an ID. We'll call this the image div, right? Just so I know what it is, right? And the same thing I'll do down here. I'll call this the, if I want to target it, if I can call this the, we'll call this the name div. Names div. And I can take all this stuff out of here, leave my picture in there, I'm going to cut, and inside my div tag in here, paste. Got two div tags now, right? Now typically the way it looks from a design perspective is that one is on top of the other. I've got my image up here, as an example, way up here, and way down here, I've got this stuff here. But I want these div tags to be beside each other. Where do I apply the float in CSS? Which div tag? On image div tag or my names div tag? Okay, so let's do that. I know that I have this stuff. Let's try it with the CSS properties here. So here's my image div tag, right? Here's my image div. Hey man, it doesn't appear on the left here. Why? Because I haven't defined it in my CSS, right? I can say my image div tag, image div, and we'll leave it empty for now. This is my tactic, by the way. And here's my names div. I call it names div, right? This is tactics, names div, image div. Now when I click on this thing, right, I have my image div right here, and I have my properties I have available to me. And instead of remembering how this all works, right? Here's my layout. Here's my float, right? And I'm going to float this left, yeah? Or I could float the other one right. What do you want me to do? In my image div, which way do you want me to do it? How about the guys in the back? This is like it's too sleepy in this class. Come on, give me an idea. You guys are experts, right? Left. All right, we'll save everything and see what it does. Let's see this run. Okay, we've got hello world. Oh man, what happened? This thing floated way up here, right? It's on the right, but this is way over here, right? That didn't quite do what I wanted it to do. You guys forgot the box model, right? Let's go back to, or maybe you never learned it. I don't know. Let's go back to design view for a second, right? Let's see how it looks. How come my design view is all out of whack now? It's all out of whack. How come I can't see anything to design for like I used to see? Well, once I started hand bombing stuff, Microsoft can't catch up. It won't show me sometimes stuff in design view. And that's why I work a lot of times in just source view. Right? I'm not really a drag and drop kind of guy from this perspective anyway. But we're going to do one example of where we do drag and drop because it's important for us to know that. Okay, and why and what happened? How come it messed up? We'll talk about that as well. All right. So let's we've got this div tag here, and you know what? We said that the other one had a float of left, right? If I go to layout here, here's my float. What if I float right? This one, float left, the other one, float right. That's going to confuse the crap out of the browser, right? And let me just turn off on my images div, what if I undo this thing and make it none? So I just erase it and get rid of that property altogether. What does it do now if I just float right? Will that do everything? Whoa, it's way over there, right? So why did it do that? And what does float right do anyway? If I kind of move this around, right? See how it kind of moves my, the stuff all the way to the right, right? To the very rightmost part of the page is what it means, right? That's what float right does, right? So this definitely, floating left worked a little better, but I want to create almost like a way of making it side by side. Who remembers how to do that? Come on, yeah. What was that? Inline box. Okay, let's try that out. I like your thinking. But let's see if it actually does what you want it to do. Tell me what to do. This is the interactive piece. Let me open the door here because I'm dying. I don't know about you guys. If I'm dying, you must be dying in this bloody room. All right. All right. So let's go back into main CSS. I could hand bomb it in here. So obviously this is incorrect. So I'm just going to take it out of here. And by the way, when you notice when I do it here, it does it on the other side as well. They're all linked up together. As soon as I have a CSS file linked up, we're good to go. I'm going to stop debugging here. Still, my manage styles isn't really active. But if I go over here and I want to change my image div, what do you want me to put in my image div? Is it my image div or my names div you want me to put the box? Both. Tell me what to type. Display. I like it. Right? What's the display? Okay. That means side by side, and I got to do it for both. You said, right? Well, that's kind of weird. That almost means that I should have a class, right? Sorry, a little bit of CSS refresher here. All right, let's try this out and see if it works. What happens now? Okay, it's still just like we did before, right? So both of them are kind of next to each other. But now I want this last name to appear underneath first name. How do I do that? How do I drop this to underneath? I could. That's really ugly. A BR? Come on. Anybody else have an idea? You guys forgot?
I remember. I can't think of the name of it.
Okay, well it's here. Look, that's why we're doing this, right? Because you can look at your, from a design view perspective. Oh, sorry. Let's go back to source view and then stop debugging. And I can look at this, my CSS properties. Here I am. And if I want to look at my label, this label here, right? And here's my text box. So my label and my text box. My label and my text box, I want both of those supposed to move down. How could I, encapsulate those two things so I can target those two things? I could use another div tag, right? Span tag, I could use span tag if I wanted to. Ugly, but I could, right? I could use a section. Like for example, I can have a section as well. Sometimes it's good to break things up with the words. Section and div are almost interchangeable nowadays, right? But let's say we use a span tag. So I kind of use a span tag. I'm going to hand bomb this thing. And inside the span tag, I'm going to put both these two things in there. Is that possible? Can we do that? Is that allowed? Here's span tag. And then inside these two things, I want to put these. Let's see what it does. Oops. From a coding perspective. All right. If I run this thing, it should make no difference, right? Yep. Well, don't I want this one span tag? So this first span, this is cool. And I want this second span to come underneath it. What do I do? What was that? No. Come on, man. I want to move this thing down with CSS. I don't want to hand bomb it. And I don't want to do things with a table. Yeah. Okay. Do I put it on the span tag? Do I name the span tag? What do I do? I got to name it. I got to target it somehow, right? So I got to target my first name label will be like first name. Let's try this out. So I want to put an ID here. Oops. Of first names. right? And I can do the same thing to this span over here, right? Last name. Guys, this is like rudimentary stuff, right? Okay, now if I stop debugging, if I go to my CSS and I click on my span, I don't have anything because I have it included in here. I'm just going to put it in there anyway. Right, so here's an ID, first name, and let's put a space in there for last name, just so we have code hinting. That's what I'm doing this. First name, last name, a bunch of IDs. Okay. And if I go back here now, and if I click on the span, I get this first name. But I'm also being hit by the names div. So you see here's the cascade. The body tag is here. It's being implemented. My names div, because I'm inside the names div tag. I'm in my first name span right here. And what I want this to do is it the first name span or the second name span that I want to clear, like you're saying? First name. Okay, let's see if you're right. So I'm going to kind of scroll down, and if I scroll down to find the layout, here's my layout. Here's clear. So I'm going to say clear left. Blaine, you're the one who's in control, man. Tell me.
I think right, but I'm not sure.
You're not sure. Anyone else? Come on, guys. You guys are killing me. Right? No one knows CSS? Oh, we're going to it means we're going to have to forget the what we call additional topics, right, for this class. And instead of doing additional topics, I'm going to slip in a CSS class for you guys. Come on. How about look it up on bloody Google, right? I'm getting mad now. Come on. Do the Google thing, man. Go up on Google and figure out what I need to do. How do I put one thing on top of the other? If in doubt, Google it. And by the way, if I ever made you do something in class, since I'm telling you to do this now, I would do the same thing. I would say, Google it, guys. Right? It's okay to Google it because you're going to do it anyway. What do I do? Have I put in too many tags? Do I need span tags? Could have I done the ID on the other IDs or the class names? Like I put a bunch of different identifiers just so we can target stuff. Yes.
Change the display on both spans and block.
Okay. So my first name span, my display is block, right? And the same thing to block. So go block, block, and save. I will save all and run it. And let's see what happens now. Hey. So this is how it appears here from an ASP.NET perspective. We got some really funky picture and the first name and last name. How about if I wanted to make this first name and last name, I'm just saying, appear right here? How do I do that? So I've got this part, but this part is down here. How do I make it up here? We're just using basic CSS. Anyone remember? No one remembers. I love it. It's great stuff. Let's leave it at this right now. You don't know, right? What was that? A 2-week break, and your brain broke, right? All right, no problem. Let's leave it alone. I'm gonna leave that one with you. Okay, let's go back down here, and in my div tag, I want to drag and drop something now. Let's see if I can drag and drop from the left. So I've got my toolbox, and I want to drag and drop a control. Now here's our typical server control, right? Let's say I want to drag and drop a button. So I'm going to take this button and drag and drop it in here. Can I do that? And yes, I can. It actually does the code for me, right? How does this look on design view? Here's my button. Here's my hello world. It's got some compression going on because I'm using, you know why it's not showing up here, right? I'm using CSS. I'm using CSS. I'm using my own CSS. I'm not using the model that ASP.NET Web Forms is allowing. I'm telling you right now, I'm doing things the other way around. If I was to use the model that they use, I would use paragraph tag after paragraph tag and different things like that. It's totally fine, by the way, both ways. Okay, cool. I've got my button, right? I want to rename this thing. I want my button to be my submit button, right? And I want my button text to say submit, right? Okay, cool. I've got my submit button. I want to make another div. Let's put some other information down here. Here's another div tag. And inside my div tag, I want to put a couple of more labels, right? So I'm going to kind of drag and drop in here a couple of labels. Here's one of them, right? And here's another one, label 1, and here's label 2. But instead of label 1 and label 2, I'm going to call this FN label, first name label, just to be, that's to be different. And here's last name label, right? My text is of label, and right now there's nothing in them. So when you actually see them, these labels aren't visible. If I was actually to run this thing, and you can see that I don't have anything visible in there whatsoever, right? This is my first name, my last name, and I got a couple things that say label, label, right? If I want to get rid of this text, for example, I don't want my labels to say anything, I can just get rid of this thing right here. My text property can be nothing. I can just remove my text property altogether if I want. Let's run it. Okay, first name, last name, a guy with a tattoo, right? And if I put in my first name now, what if I do this? What if I type in my first name? So Tom, my last name, hey, look, remembers, because it's my computer, right? And I click submit, right? Well, nothing happens, right? Nothing happens when I submit, right? So I haven't done anything with it to make it submit. I haven't done anything on the server to make me do something. All right, cool, cool. Well, remember, when we did Windows forms with C#, right? Wasn't I able to like double click? And didn't that create stuff for me from a double clicking perspective? So if I go back up to the body, let's go back up there where if I can see my submit button. Let's stop debugging for a second. Here's my submit button. If I double click on this, will it do the same thing? Let's double click. Yo, I got a C# form now, man. Hey, I got a couple things here in my C# form, right? This is a C# class. So this is where you combine your C# skills with JavaScript, CSS, HTML5, and everything else, right, for the first time. I've got my submit button click. Here's my click event, right? And now I want to target stuff. I want to say, when I click my submit button, my text from my first name label, FN label, right? So I'll start typing FN label, it comes up. FN label.text, right, is equal to, right, my first name label, first name text box dot text, right? And my last name label dot text, right? Oops, if I can type, is equal to my last name text box dot text. Well, that's a little bit of C#, right? Well, this file, by the way, where the hell is this file, right? Let's go back to Solution Explorer for a second, and I'll tag this in. If you notice, in my default Aspx file, if I actually expand everything here, I have a couple things here. I have my aspx.cs file, and I have my aspx.designer.cs file. If I click on this, that gives me my XML values for what the designer knows about my submit button, my labels. These are all ASP.NET controls that I'm putting into my form. Okay, that's what this is. We don't really want to touch this part. This is part of our partial class, right? And then we have this other piece, right, which almost looks exactly like Windows forms right here, right? And this piece is this, ASP.XCS. The reason why our file, our default ASPX file, why it knows that this is where to look is because at the top of our file, like I showed you earlier, right? It has this, language C#, and our code behind file is pointing at default.aspx.cs. You could also change this if you wanted to make it something else. Okay, so this is the difference between regular, HTML5 and CSS and stuff like this, and then ASP.NET. Okay, let's try this out, see what happens. So I run this thing, and if everything goes well, here's my first name, Tom, my last name, and when I click submit, it does a round trip, and it does Tom Studiopoulos. Right? So that's right away we know how to do stuff, right, without any data. If you know Windows Forms, can you imagine now you can do almost exactly the same stuff you did with Windows Forms with ASP.NET. So one more thing, I don't like the fact that when I click submit, my first name and my last name remain. I didn't tell them to do anything. How do I clear that up? What would I do on the C# side? All right, so here I am, and so inside my submit button, I want to clear up the text, right? Let me stop debugging. That would be good. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. I could go on the C# side, and I can say something like this: first name text box dot text, right, is equal to nothing. I could do that. Same thing, last name text box dot text, right, is equal to nothing. You know what else I want to do? I want to disable them, right? I want to disable the submit button, right? So that you can't submit again once you submitted the first time. Once you submit, that's it, right? So how do I do that? How do I disable the submit button on click? Yeah. On click, I click the button. Once I click it one time, it's disabled. How do I do that?
Disable the button or the box?
The button. You almost have it. That's right. That's it. So you go like this. You go really simple, guys. If you know your C#, you know this. Submit button, right? So I'm gonna start typing submit button. There it is. That's what I called it. Dot enabled, right, is equal to false. Right? Same stuff we learned in Windows Forms. If I press play now, right? Now it's not going to check if there's anything in there, by the way. Right? I haven't done any kind of validation whatsoever. So I go Tom, my last name, right, and click submit. And not only is it cleared these text boxes, but now I can't click on the button anymore because I've disabled it. All right, so that's my little demo for today. I wanted to kind of get you guys to understand that a couple things. ASP.NET, the way we do stuff, right, it's very similar to what we do with Windows Forms. When we do more controls and stuff next week, right, we're going to talk about bootstrapping it a little bit. Because, you know what? I'll tell you right now, I don't want nothing to do with this kind of boring CSS that we have here, right? This is bad, right? That's the first thing. And Bootstrap is built into ASP.NET, right? So there's nothing you have to do. You just have to enable it, right? We'll talk about how to do that and how we can use the CDN and shortcuts, right? That's the one thing. And the second thing is, these little controls, what the hell did we do here, right? How did I make this stuff go? What happened, right? Well, here's what happened, right? When we did that round trip stuff, right? I have a code behind file, and if you look at the PowerPoint presentation, the code behind file is actually the CS file, the C# file that I can use, and I use the IDs of the objects, right? So that way, anything in the text box, I can create this round trip by sending information to the server. It's going to get processed by the application server and sent back out to the web form, so-called doing a single binding, one-way binding. It's not truly one-way binding, though. There's other ways you can do things. One more thing before we go, right? So this is kind of cool, right? But I want to pump out the date, Tom Siliopoulos, and maybe the date next to it. All right, how do I do that? Right. Well, I can create a variable right up here. This is my class. I'm doing C#. If I can do stuff with C#, theoretically I should be able to do stuff like I normally can, right? So let's say I'm going to stop debugging. Let's say if this should be working the same. If we know C#, my theory is we can do the same thing. So I'm going to declare a variable of type, we'll make it string for now. Right? So here's my string variable. And in my string variable, we're going to call it my date, right? And my date is going to have a value of, you know what, I'm going to go back in time to 1977, right? Where Star Wars was happening, right? 1977, right? So I'm a Star Wars fan. And I'm going to say, you know what, when I go back here, what's up, Angie?
How are you?
Don't run away. I'm going to be there in a second.
Oh, I have a glass from
Oh, you're killing me, Angie. You're killing me.
What are you doing?
I'm doing ASP.NET. So if I go to string my date, if I make it 1977, I got to give this thing some kind of access modifier. What access modifier do you think, by looking at the access modifiers that are up here, what's the safe thing to use? What would you say? What kind of access modifier? First of all, what is a bloody access modifier? The guys I'm going to target the guys in the back. Steve. What? Public or private, or well, there's one third. Protected is the other one, right? And you see protected up there already. So those are their access modifiers. Private, public, protected, right? So chances are public or protected might work well, right? Because if I'm seeing protected here already, right? So let's try protected. So protected, right? My date, that's what it's called, right? Hey, theoretically, if I build this thing, I'm just going to build. I'm not going to run it. I'm just going to build this thing. If the build succeeds, that means theoretically, if I go to my, I'm going to kill this main.css. If I go to my default.aspx here, right? Can I access that file somehow? Or that number? I could. Here's a way you can do it. There's one way. Less than % equals, right? And now I'm going to start typing the name of my variable, if I've done this correctly, my date. Hey, look, there it is. My date, right? I'm going to put that there, okay? Does that look weird, right? Doesn't it look a little bit like PHP, right? I'm not making the echo command, though. I'm just saying my date. So let's see what it does. So run it, right? And, you know, I kind of run this thing, and bam, 1977, right? Yeah, but wait a minute. What happened to my name? Oh, yeah, I didn't do anything yet. I got to do this, right? So where is this 1977 going to appear, right? It's going to go next to it, right? Because that's how it works out from you know, the way our CSS is working with our HTML, right? And it's disabled just the way it was before. Well, this is cool. So that means I can inject the values of variables inside of my code. If I have it on my on my C# side, I can inject it on the HTML side. And that means that I can do the same thing. Instead of doing it like this, I can do it within my ASP.NET inside my C# file itself. So let me stop debugging. Go in here, and when I say this, right, I want to, how do I display that? I want to add this into my last name maybe. So I'm going to say my last name plus, you know, oh, wait, that's not right. I want to say this, my last name label is my text plus a space plus, you know, my date, right? Plus my date, right? And that should do it too, if I'm not wrong, right? Let's try this out. So I'm just using the standard C# stuff. Hey, more Asian girls. Tom, right? And then it's not my choice, I'm sorry. And then click submit, and there it is, right? So there's a bunch of ways of passing data from the server, right, to the page, right? A couple ways I've shown you how to do it. One way with that funky new less than % equals, and then the name of the variable. And the other way is it's a C# variable, right? Remember, everything we can do with C# pretty much we can do here. The way we data bind, the way we access files, everything. Yeah. You have to use a date. You have to create a date. You have to create a date object, and from the date object, you say current date now. I think it is, right? Yeah. So if I was to do that, just because you asked, Kelly, see what you've done to me, right? So again, we'd have to create a variable up here instead of my date being 1977, a hard-coded date. We'd have to go up here and say that my date is actually a date object, right? Right, so we're going to say is equal to new date time object, right? And when it asks me for, it says 11 overloaded methods. What does the date time object allow me to do? If I open it up, it says date time by itself, how many ticks, int year, int month, int day, right? Instance of the system date, right? Month, year, day, and so on. And there's a bunch of different overloaded, like there's a bunch of different constructors that I can use to create my date time object. All right, and then from there I can take it and I can use another method on the date time object to get that. I can also use it so that it's I just create it here. I can say date time, right? And if I believe if I say is it max value or now? Yeah. It's a property, right? And it's saying that I cannot implicitly convert type system to string, which means I have to convert this thing. So I'm going to take this and go toString. Got toString. Oh, sorry, extra semicolon there. And that should convert it to string, and then we should get some weird date. Let's try that out. So la la la, Tom, la 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 la, and submit. It's not impossible. You can do anything you want. As long as you know a little bit of C#, you can pump out whatever date you want. Your current date. Any questions around this? So again, recap. We did a little bit of C# and ASP.NET. Yes?
Can we access this kind of file from the one server?
From our?
The WAMP?
No, because it's using IIS. IIS is a different application server than WAMP. WAMP is an AMP stack, right? Okay, let me do one thing in my Solution Explorer. One thing I forgot to do. I'm going to stop debugging before we go. In my, I'm going to pull up my Team Explorer, and I want to sync up with my GitHub, right? So let's go with GitHub changes. Added some test controls, commits, and home sync. So you'll have everything that I have. All right, guys. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. We'll do more of this stuff, and hopefully by next week we'll get our Azure accounts so we can go up to Azure and start deploying to the cloud. The cloud. Thank you.